This is the first edition of the Khoodeelaar campaign. Khoodeelaar is a Siloti language word, the anglicized spelling of Sylhet, which is divided between Bangladesh and the mainly the state of Assam in northeast India. Khoodeelaar is the word that I created as the equivalent, action equivalent in context to the French word oya. But the French word oya is a single task kind of word. It doesn't contain the dimensions that the Khoodeelaar word contains. So Khoodeelaar is Siloti, not Bengali. Siloti word, and it denotes and connotes various things, all to do with starting with the cry, alarm, warning, asking people being targeted or addressed to be alert and aware and ready to defend their territory, which in the context of this particular campaign that I began with K. Jordan in December 2003 in defending the community in the East End of London against the City of London, which is the financial capital and also the agency of the worst of capitalism, exploitation and corruption that exists. And they have been trying for decades to remove the community, the people, the demography that is part of what is known as Brick Lane area. But Brick Lane is only one small street. It actually includes a wider part of East London, which is originally known as Cockney. That is a different discussion, but that is the area that was targeted by the high-speed railway line Crossrail. And that line was being used as a pretext, as an excuse to dig a big hole right in the middle of the Brick Lane area. And that hole, if they were allowed to do that, dig that hole, would have meant that thousands of people would have been made to leave their homes or stop their businesses. Most of them are small businesses. So this is a campaign that we have successfully fought, and we have defeated the UK central government, the UK Parliament, and their supporters and their stooges, their agents, in the form of the local, quote, elected Tower Hamlets Council, regardless of their ethnic identities or backgrounds of the elected incumbents in the council, the biggest majority being Bangladeshi origin. But despite that, those Bangladeshi origin councillors were doing the bidding for the big business and were engaged in corruptly endorsing the Crossrail whole plot, whole spelled H-O-L-E. So it's a Khoodeelaar is a 3-4 dimensional word. All dimensions have been applied, and the word has been instantaneously recognizable because the community affected includes a big chunk of the people who speak Siloti and come from Silot. Anyone watching this for the first time would find that we are actually running a series of world exclusive diagnostic analysis of what is the Fleet Street newspapers, £13.90. 10 of those titles cost today £13.90 in the current 2021 prices. And that is not an insignificant amount for one kind of look at the papers, because most people don't buy newspapers, and those who do buy only one, most of them. We are buying all of them published from Fleet Street, that is to say from London addresses. And what we do in the World Exclusive Diagnosis is to look at the papers critically and diagnostically, and by applying the standards of ethics, morality, universality, and transparency, all objectively universally defined, and also, where appropriate, going into areas that are not necessarily in the papers but should have been in the papers. And that is the approach. It is not something that can be found in any other place, on any other channel, or any other terrestrial or satellite television channel as far as we know. And the disclaimer is that if anyone knows that there is such comparable channel or outlet, we shall be more than happy to note that and update our claims and our disclaimer accordingly. This is a service that we are doing, not as part of the big business multimedia kind of corporate action, but to spread and share knowledge, universal knowledge and evidence and morality. We have got a very serious, dedicated interest in the affairs and the events of the subcontinent, which collectively mainly is known as Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. But in the neighboring Sri Lanka and Nepal and other smaller countries, we are also interested in, and also about the fate of the people, the victims of the genocide by the Burmese, genocide against the Rohingya people, which is, the Rohingya is the Rakhine state of Burma, and it is situated to the east of Bangladesh, southeast of Bangladesh. And Cox's Bazar is the city which has become the host location for almost 1 million victims of the Burmese genocide and expulsion, and we shall be updating accordingly. What we have said so far is that the plight of the Rohingyas has been known to be in a serious position, and nothing has been done until the 2017 kind of forced arrival of these people, mainly on Bangladesh land and soil. And the United Nations, we have told the current Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, that he has been racist in his refusal to highlight the plight of the Rohingya people, and he has been complicit in his collusion with the BJP and the Brahminist Narendra Modi, who actually paid a visit to Burma to congratulate Aung San Suu Kyi, who is the leader of the genocidist regime. So we are making comments as and when we find the evidence and the context justify and warrant them. And as I said, we would be more than willing to note any similar channel that diagnoses the media, either the British media or the media in the USA or North America, in Canada or Western Europe or any other country. So far, we have found no such program. So we are doing something that is unique, factually unique, ethically unique, morally unique, and absolutely necessary. And we are doing something also that is the job of looking objectively at the media and the role of the many agencies of the United Nations, but the United Nations agencies have been failing or have been choosing not to do what we are doing, that is to say, objectively, diagnostically, ethically, and morally look at the contents of the role and the narrative of the papers. Now, turning to something domestic in the context of the UK, here is page 8 of today's Daily Mirror, that is Friday, the 29th of January 2021. And that is the picture of a mum who was forced to commit suicide by the DWP. DWP is officially called the Department for Work and Pensions, but we call it Deprivation, Want and Poverty Creation Department, which is supposed to be the welfare department of the UK central government. This name, DWP, was created during Tony Blair. Tony Blair is the official name, but we have been calling him, our movement has been calling him Tony Blair since late 1997, a few months after he got in with the landslide in May 1997. And when we diagnosed Blair as the liar, all the events that he later indulged in and all the war crimes and other things that he committed were not yet fact. So what we said about him being a liar was unfortunately vindicated, and we were proven right by his criminality. Now, Tony Blair called this Department for Want and Poverty Creation, Deprivation and Want and Poverty Creation, in our paraphrasing. It used to be called the DSS, Department for Social Security. Now, at no time in the decades since this welfare or benefit department has existed has it delivered the real benefit needed by people in the poorest states of income and lowest income. Now, this mom, the woman is named Philippa Day, 27, and she was discovered with a DWP letter by her side, and the letter refused her a home visit to assess if her payments could be reinstated. Now, it's a long kind of issue, but we shall give a contextual, topical summary, an update about Philippa Day. Now, Philippa Day, we say, was murdered. It's not the Daily Mirror. The Daily Mirror, which we have been reading from, is not calling it a murder. And the Daily Mirror pretends to be the only Fleet Street tabloid that is not a kind of open agency and peddler of the conservatives. So its niche market is actually based on the pretension that it's a tabloid, but the tabloid that supports the Labour Party. The large number of its readers or buyers are Labour Party members or supporters. And the other paper, which is not overtly conservative, is the Guardian, but we have been demonstrating that the contents of the editorial line and the tone of the Guardian has become increasingly brazenly, blatantly Tory, with a small c, conservative. And that has been happening since the editorship was taken over by Catherine Viner. But even before that, Alan Rushbridger, who is a corrupt editor who was in place for a long time, was showing all signs of being a clone, a copy, an imitator of the conservative line, followed by the corrupt and Nazi and racist, nasty Daily Mail and their kind of political, ideological kind of partners, the Beaverbrook's Legacy, the Daily Express, and the Dirty Digger, Rupert Murdoch's scum. We call it scum, it is son. And the Daily Mirror is refusing or hesitating to call it a murder, despite the fact that there is evidence, there is absolute proof that these people, the people whose money, the benefit, very small amount to begin with, but even that amount is withheld from them. And the withholding is intended to force them to commit suicide. So we have called previous incidents of people being sanctioned or denied their small amount of benefit, that they have been mass murdered or they have been caused mass suicides by the DWP. And the DWP has been doing this not for the first time, but this has been doing this in more cases since the election of 2010, the May 2010 election. And let's see what kind of online accessible items we can find about the DWP murders, suicide, DWP suicides. Anyone watching this must not expect entertainment. This is a very serious issue. Every item we discuss is very serious, and only those who have got the actual intellectual, moral dedication and interest are likely to find it worth watching. Otherwise, they are free not to watch it. And we don't follow friends on this, and we don't encourage friends, not because we don't want people to watch this, but as a policy, we are disagreeing with YouTube and Facebook as part of our moral policy. As we broadcast online, the contents are online accessible, available. So anyone can search and look for under the terms KhoodeelaarTV, and they will come across hundreds. And we have started this particular broadcast in July, so you can go back and find a mixture of broadcasts still available, accessible, and they are of the same kind of quality and kind of dimensions, are multiple dimensions. And as we say, we are doing this exclusively, world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. Now, one item that we find in the kind of search that we have found, this one is from the disability news item about Philippa Day. And the disability news service, which is the only one of its type, it claims to be unique in that it is based on news about disability and the welfare benefit and the benefit obstruction and so on. But even that one is timid. Just like the Daily Mirror, that one is timid and is not using the phrases that we have been using. For example, the suicides of the victims of withdrawal of funds. And These people, the Disability News Service and those who retweet their tweets, are hesitant, and what we call generally are part of the population of England that we call the gullibles, people who are open to being brainwashed and zombified and stooged. And they still believe in, most of them still believe in the empire and the glory and the rule Britannia, Britannia rule and all the rest of it. And yet, these are the people that are among the victims of the rule Britannia and Little England. And we shall come to Boris Johnson's trip to Scotland this week and his kind of apology earlier. What we are saying is that the contents of the behavior of the government in the UK expose the unfitness for government by the Conservatives. But then Keir Starmer, who is the so-called opposition leader in the House of Commons now, is as bad as Boris Johnson, or could be very dangerously, misleadingly kind of able to entice people into backing him rather than the cause and the actual agenda of the founding era of the Labour Party more than 100 years ago. So what we are saying in this diagnostic analysis is that people, ordinary people and people who are independent of the, intellectually and morally independent of the kind of patronage and approval of any of the political parties, must not look at the political parties for solution to society's problems and to access to remedies that are aimed to be just and fair. As we have been saying now, the diagnosis of Fleet Street doesn't only concern the political parties and the political personalities or the incumbents in the post of prime minister or the cabal that Johnson fronts, members of the cabal as health secretary or education secretary so-called. We also examine with necessary detail when appropriate in the context of evidence the behavior of the British or the England-based judiciary, contrary to the mythology that has been spread right across the world over the last few hundred years. There is no such thing as English justice. There is English bureaucracy, legal bureaucracy, which is corrupt, dishonest, and abjectly, that is thoroughly racist, and still practices the norms of empire, which is why we have been compiling a list of social media accounts that are operated in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and we have been watching events, and we are going back up to August 1947 and looking at the 74 calendar years since August 1947. And we are the program that is actually dedicated to examining the reasons for people from the subcontinent arriving in the UK and what the consequences have been and the impact. None of the media in any of the countries, say India or Pakistan or Bangladesh, to our knowledge, they may be doing it in some languages that we have not been able to access, but to our knowledge, none of the programs has been, or the media has been looking at the impact of the last 74 years on the lives of the people. And we have been including in the analysis a lot of Tollywood and Bollywood films that we have been watching, and the context and the actual core reference being the last 74 years. And we shall be sharing those and updating on our findings. And we'll be doing that same thing about Bangladesh and about Pakistan and the equivalent outlets and the media in those two countries as well. And what we have been doing is looking. I spoke to these people, so it might help some of the new persons viewing this. I had a very short debate with Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and when he was sacked by Ayub Khan, and he was, I mean, it wasn't my plan, but the encounter or the debate ended with Bhutto literally being in tears, and he stormed out of the venue of the meeting, which was the Engineers Institute in Dhaka, in Bangladesh. And I had similar encounter, well, that is even shorter, with Morarji Desai when he was in London as part of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in 1977. Same year, same event, not the same kind of venue, but same week. I interviewed then Bangladesh President Ziaur Rahman. Very extensive interviews of questions, and Ziaur Rahman was not able to answer most of the questions that I put to him. Same case with Desai. I condemned Desai at a news conference held in the India House in London for his complicity and collusion with James Callaghan, who was the Prime Minister at the time, on racism, because we were campaigning in London against racism being perpetrated against people of the subcontinental background. So when we do the diagnosis of Fleet Street, it is not just the newspapers, not just the headline, just not the contents of the news items or comment items. It covers far wider range than anything can be found similar. Anything similar can be found on any so-called press review, that is the type that is run on the BBC News Channel, Sky News Channel, and on the ITV channel, Good Morning Britain GMB. And so therefore what we are doing is not available in England, in Britain, in the UK, nor is anything similar available in the USA or in Canada. Well, Canada is even less likely than USA because of the proportionate number of racism or racist incidents that dominate the otherwise friendly country. And in the USA, despite the fact that we have had a nightmare 5 years, calendar years, with Trump, there are various diverse kind of movements and activities. So our examination also includes the role of the academies, the universities, the schools, the so-called education system. So it's a post-imperial, and in the current kind of terminology, we can say post-pandemic engagement, intellectual, moral, ethical, evidential engagement with those who have the patience and the interest in looking at the contents of the behavior of the media, the behavior of the politicians in power, the behavior of the politicians wanting to be in power, both in the UK, in the USA, and in North America and Western Europe, including the European Union. But we are not yet looking at the European Union newspapers. We shall be doing that, and we shall be also, as we said in a previous series of announcements, we shall be doing a comparable look at the First, initially, English language titles coming from Chennai, New Delhi, and Bombay or Mumbai and Kolkata. And we shall be looking at those based on the differences of opinion between Subhash Chandra Bose and the rest of them. For example, Subhash was wanting a united kind of subcontinent after the empire ended, and he obviously was not successful. But many of the analysis, many of the narratives, many of the commentaries about his behavior have shown that he was on the right track in many respects. And we shall be talking about the subcontinent, also about the poverty, raging poverty on the one hand, and the indulgence in the nuclear proliferation by all these countries. And what are the reasons for that? And of course, we shall be talking about China and why China may be appearing to be taking sides with Pakistan, but may not be all that helpful and may not be all that sincere because of its endorsement of the genocide of the Rohingya people by the Burmese. And we shall also look at the three countries, China, Pakistan, and India, kind of occupying parts of Kashmir and why that is so. So this is a newspaper diagnosis, but much more than that. And all of that is aimed at creating an understanding of the evidence and the fact and the truth. We are not aligned to any party, and we are not likely to be aligned to any party or any kind of group or any government or any quasi-government or whatever. We are absolutely independent, ordinary people doing the ordinary job that needs to be done, the truth to be found and told, and our purpose is to support similar campaigns everywhere. And we are dedicated to supporting the rights and the needs of animals and the fragility, the vulnerability that human beings have caused to the planet Earth. We are addressing that as well in our intent and our agenda. So this is the Khoodeelaar campaign, KHOODEELAAR, Khoodeelaar campaign, world exclusive diagnosis of the newspapers collectively known as Fleet Street. And this time we are going through the first part. Now, let's go back to this woman. The Mirror is calling her a mentally ill mom, and they're saying that she committed suicide. Well, the word suicide is not used. What they're saying in that first paragraph is fatal drug. Fatal means deadly, literally deadly. So those who are not too used to the English kind of colloquial English, fatal is not necessarily immediately understood as deadly or killing. But that is what they're saying. And what the Independent, well, what the Independent said about the other murders, we shall come to that. But this one is based on what the coroner, Gordon Clow, outlined. Coroner is somebody who examines the cause of death after somebody has died. So this one has outlined, this coroner, Gordon Clow, CLOW, he has outlined 28 systematic errors in the handling of her case by the DWP, the Deprivation, Want and Poverty Creation Department, which the contractor for the DWP which is Capita, C-A-P-I-T-A. Now, Capita is one of those 2 or 3 organizations, big multi-billion pound contracts given to them by the UK government to carry out the agenda. On the surface, apparently, they are doing the job of the DWP, that is to say, they are outsourced kind of contractors who do the job not in-house by the DWP itself, but on behalf of the DWP, they look at the various claims made by claimants, including people in conditions that this tragic 27-year-old woman, a mom, Philippa Day, was in. Now, I have had, as part of my work, campaigning work, not business, campaign work, I advocate law and legal rights, and I have had any number of dealings with the crooks in the DWP on behalf of people that have approached me for help. Now, in the more than 20 years that I've been dealing with the DWP, not one of my questions and challenges evidentially put to these criminals has been objectively answered truthfully or accurately. And the criminals include the conservative, neo-conservative bastard, Peter Lilly. Now, the bastard is not my word. Bastard is the word used about Peter Lilly by the Prime Minister, the Tory Prime Minister, John Major. John Major called Peter Lilly and 2 other bastards. The 2 others are John Redwood, and the other one is the Spanish origin racist Michael Portillo, who is called Michael Portillo, anglicized name. And John Major was speaking after a briefing with the kind of media, and he thought that the microphone had been turned off after the event. And he was talking to some people who might have been included, the then political editor of ITN News, Independent Television News, which is now called ITB News. And that man was called Michael Branson, not like Richard Branson, it's spelled B-R-U-N-S for sugar, O-N. So Michael Branson actually reported in his then capacity as the political editor of ITB, ITN News. And he reported exclusively at that time. Of course, this has become a classic point of reference now. Everyone refers to that. And Branson said that after the tense period, whatever the length of the period was, a week or a month or whatever, because this was about Europe, this was about the UK membership of the EU, and that was happening in the early 1990s, some years before the 1997 general election, which Tony Blair won in a landslide. But one of the reasons why the Tories, led by John Major at the time, lost the election, one of the reasons was this tension, created constant tension maintained within the Conservative Party in Parliament by the bastards and their followers. So when he was talking, John Major thought that the microphone had been turned off. So he said these names and implied these names, and he called them bastards. And everyone who was politically aware knew who the leading bastards were. And they were, Michael Portillo, John Redwood, and Peter Lilly. Peter Lilly was an MP for Hitchin area in England, southeast England. Now, Peter Lilly is one of the most poisonous liars as a human being one of the most poisonous liars who has been allowed to be in frontline elected political office. He's a liar in the literal sense. So look up the word liar and all the meanings and all the kind of various dimensions of the meaning apply to him. And he's still active. He's in the House of Peers. I don't call it the House of Lords because Lords does not belong to a human being. It's only a deity and the God and divine kind of title. Lord doesn't belong to any human being. So we call it House of Peers, which is also accurate in terms of the usage. Now, Peter Lilly has been deposited in the House of Peers, where he spews like Norman Tebbit, another racist conservative. Now, these people have been behind the real coup that has been ongoing, periodic coups against the leader, most of the leaders of the Conservative Party over Europe. Now, this is not the moment to discuss the various defects of the Brexit thing that has happened in the last 5 years. But let's say that everything the Brexiteers said about the need for Britain to leave the European Union, every major problem or the main problem that they said was being caused by the European Union has been a lie. So we shall be updating on the lies in due course. But let's go back to the bastards. And Peter Lilly was the bastard in post at the DSS, Department for Social Security, at the time because he was in government before the landslide victory by the Labour Party as fronted by Tony Blair in May 1997. And all the policies that Peter Lilly, the criminal, created or endorsed or elaborated on about welfare and benefit and poverty, all the policies were based on lies. Now, people who may be kind of sensitive to language and maybe thinking that I'm using the word lies and liars kind of too readily need this clarification. I'm not. And if I said this before 2015, people might be justified in having skeptical view about my usage. But after Donald Trump and his 5 years as the swamp personified, lies and liars about people in government, people in politically so-called elected office, do not constitute surprise or unbelievable kind of description. Donald Trump will go down in history as the personification, the embodiment of disgrace and lying and racism and all the other things that people would be justified in hesitating to describe someone as being. For example, when he said, let's ban all Muslims, and the hand gestures, incredibly stupid and infantile hand gestures, hand movements. When he said, let's ban all Muslims, he wasn't in any doubt that he was lying, he was making up. But he did that in order to seduce and to capture those gullibles in the American electorate that he knew would want him to do something like that, because a large part of the American population is absolutely, literally stupid, ignorant, totally uneducated, but can be galvanized and mobilized by propaganda, the type that Donald Trump actually did practice. Donald Trump and Steve Bannon and all the other criminal racists. So when Peter Lilly was Secretary of State, the cabinet minister in the name of the Social Security, he openly argued for the creation of further poverty, further deprivation. Now, all of these kind of additional criminality that he was adding to the already criminally cruel bureaucracy of the Department for Social Security, so-called, were in breach of international legal obligations. For example, the Treaty of Rome that actually created the European Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Rights and Freedom. It has now been shortened and is called a shorter name, ECHR. The ECHR has got articles. The articles are based entirely on the founding declarations of the United Nations, so 10 years previously. And so therefore the European countries did something in accordance with the then founding aims of the United Nations. And the United Nations founding declarations are very much kind of accepted now in the discourse, in the ordinary discussions about human rights. Although the concept of human rights has existed prior to the founding of the United Nations, a systematic, institutionalized acceptance by member countries of the human rights was not heard of until after the United Nations had to be founded following the Nazis and the Second European World War, as they say. The fundamental rights include the right to have proper home, income, dignity, respect, and not to starve, not to have to starve and go through hunger and all the rest of it. And Peter Lilly was supposed to be upholding those principles. Instead, he was openly smashing them. Now, the opposition Labour Party at that time was not, Blair joined only after John Smith died after a short spell as the leader. The opposition party was led by or misled by a Welsh racist called Neil Kinnock. Let me just also say that I had encounters with James Callaghan, and I have always called him a racist, not because I have no access to other words for him, but because he was a racist. When I asked him at a meeting held in the London Connaught House in central London, near the Indian Embassy, near the Holborn Station, near the Strand, where the BBC World Service used to be based at, and near the High Court in the Strand. I asked him about racist Britain or racist policies of his government. Now, he could have given me a different answer. He could have disagreed with me. He could have said that there was no evidence or whatever. He could have said as a politician. But it's not what he said, it's the expression on his face. The expression on his face I cannot reproduce because I'm not him. And it's not something that I actually have any access to an image of. But the expression was absolutely nasty. Nastiness personified. And that was him being racist, because I had asked him questions about racist attacks in Britain against people of Indian, Pakistan, Bangladeshi backgrounds. And that was his expression. What he said also was the same as his expression on his face. He said, James Callaghan, that his government or his country did not need other people to comment. He was obviously referring to me as other people. And he was not hiding his racism and his stupidity. Now, I was following, not with approval, but I was following literally what Macaulay had said. Macaulay had said in introducing the 1835 India Education Act that the people of the subcontinent, today's Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, would be externally on the outside brown and on the inside English as a result of the education program that he was ushering in. And Macaulay condemned the Sanskrit language, the Hindi language, the Urdu language, the Arabic language. In his list, I couldn't find Bengali or Siloti, but he condemned all the main, or those of the main languages that he did mention, like Sanskrit, Urdu, Arabic, and Hindi. And he condemned the Hindi and the Sanskrit more harshly than he condemned the Arabic and the Urdu. And he said that all of those languages, despite the degree of kind of condemnation varying between them, he said that all these languages are unfit, that were backward, that had no real dexterity to them, the flexibility, linguistic flexibility or communication or content, and that the people of the subcontinent needed English for expression, communication, all the rest of it. So when I asked Callaghan why his government was allowing racist attacks, I did the asking in English. I wasn't speaking in Urdu or Hindi or Arabic or Sanskrit. I was speaking in English. As his racist kind of model or role model or leader, Macaulay had claimed was the best thing, the normal thing, the right thing to do. And James Callaghan came across as coming from the darkness, the depth of the dungeon of darkness, or the deepest dungeon of darkness, of backwardness, ignorance, idiocy, and stupidity, and lack of respect and regard. And he was breaking the United Nations Charter that the UK in 1977 was signed up to for 20 years already. Because the ECHR, the Treaty of Rome, that Treaty of Rome was signed up in 1957. And I was asking him the question in 1977. So when Peter Lilly the conservative, was breaking the United Nations requirements and declarations, human rights, and the European Convention, kind of updated version of the European Convention on human rights, Peter Lilly comparatively could be excused because he was a member of the most corrupt and most cruel party, which had in its manifesto an option and commitment to be against compassion, for cruelty. But the Labour Party was the opposite, at least in the founding statements of the Labour Party. The Labour Party still claims to be for compassion and against cruelty. And yet, Neil Kinnock, when Peter Lilly was doing his dirties against the victims of poverty created by them, Kinnock wasn't bothered, nor was any of the other members of the Labour Party Parliament at the time. So when the Daily Mirror reports about this, it is doing the stupidest type of tabloid journalism, because it is not bringing into focus, into the frame of reference, that which would have exposed the cruelty in its full nastiness. And that means the obligations under the United Nations founding declarations and the European Convention for Human Rights. This is the type of constitutional kind of liberation or constitutional kind of upgrading that the membership of international bodies did to the otherwise racist, dark ageist England, because England rules the rest of the United Kingdom, for example, Scotland, Wales, Cornwall. Cornwall has been now reduced to absolutely just a ward. Cornwall has a history of its own, but it's not mentioned in the description when they say England and Wales. Actually, Cornwall is in between them, but they have completely consumed Cornwall out of existence. So England and Wales, then Scotland, then Northern Ireland. These are the four parts of the current United Kingdom. And the Daily Mirror doesn't mention the United Nations, doesn't mention the Treaty of Rome about the ECHR. And what happens, therefore, is that this report, although it is a report full of the data about the deaths of the poor people being denied the basic money and the 28 errors that the coroner has listed in the DWP's misconduct with the and towards the victim, Miss Day, Philippa Day, who has died and committed suicide. So if there is no political or internationally kind of agreed standard of pressure on a member country, then the member country can do whatever it likes, and the government is doing this. And this Daily Mirror piece is not going to make any significant difference in the behavior of the Johnson-fronted cabal. And that is why the membership of the European Union was resented by the Little Englanders who wanted to do this kind of thing without any foreign oversight or international oversight. For example, those who don't know about the European Union and its behavior, I mean, when I was doing the kind of, I have done several formal and informal courses for empirical reasons in universities. And one of the courses that we had to do, or one of the papers, was the one about the impact of the UK's European Union membership. And there were literally thousands of directives, declarations, announcements, and statements that referred to behavior of member governments or member countries that were contrary to the standards that have to be observed. And this is why one of the most powerful arguments that the racists, Little Englanders like Peter Lilly and Norman Tebbit, and the two other bastards that John Major mentioned, John Redwood and Michael Portillo, they wanted to get the gullibles, the easily brainwashable, zombifiable little Englanders to think that their glorified country and independence was being interfered with by the foreigners, the European Union members or European Union kind of officials or the European Union Assembly. That's not the case. The poorest people in Britain and the most disadvantaged because of the behavior of the UK government, not because there was ever the lack of resources to help the people who needed the socialized, that is publicly available help. So when the Daily Mirror writes the piece that it has written, it doesn't mention the suicide as being part of the government creating this as a policy. Now, as a policy, this phrase is a reference to what Peter Lilly's successor, Ian Duncan Smith, did. Now, remember there is a significant number of years between Lilly being in post as the Secretary of State or Cabinet Minister at the Department for Social Security and the Tories being out of government for 13 years until 2010. And when they got in power in government in 2010, they appointed Ian Duncan Smith. Now, our campaign has been calling him Dracula Duncan Smith because of the deadly killing machine that he created at the by now renamed department. The name of the department when Peter Lilly was in place was Department for Social Security, and it has been changed to DWP under Blair. And by the time the Blair led series of Labour governments left office, it was taken over by the Conservative David Cameron, and Cameron appointed Ian Duncan Smith as the secretary for DWP. And Duncan Smith set out to revive the agenda of Peter Lilly of the early 1990s, and he continued to cause mass murders by hunger. Let's look at the item that refers to him, and then we can move. Now there are several items online about the murders of these people. And there is an item here dated the 7th of February 2020, just under a year ago, in the Independent Online. And it says disgraceful surge in suicides among benefit claimants prompts condemnation of DWP. And the government has investigated 69 suicides of benefit claimants in the last 5 years, which is highly unlikely to be overall number of self-inflicted deaths, says the National Audit Office. And see, they don't say They don't say that these were murders caused by the DWP, but that's what they were. And there are literally dozens of items online that confirm that the government intentionally withheld money so that the people were forced to commit suicide. And that was intended to be the consequence of the money being withheld from them, because they wouldn't get the necessary money from anywhere else. There is no recourse to automatically getting money, and they couldn't borrow money because the rate at which the interest was paid or claimed was beyond the capability of people in the direst of poverty and lack of income. So this was calculated by the DWP as part of the policy of Ian Dracula Duncan Smith, and the money was being withheld as an actual push to people to commit suicide. So this was not just breaking the international obligations, but openly committing a crime against humanity. And again, the Labour Party in opposition has not made anything like the necessary noise that they should have made and they could have made, and they still must make. And this item in the Daily Mirror, this main item, doesn't mention any of the Labour Party front benchers, let alone Keir Starmer. And as I was saying earlier, Capita is one of the contractors that caused the kind of assessment to be the basis for withholding the money from this victim of enforced suicide, Philippa Day. Capita is one of the 3 organizations that are paid hundreds of millions of pounds by the UK government to carry out, on the surface, the purpose is to let them do the job that the departmental staff internally cannot do because there are not enough of them. But actually, there is a license de facto. That is to say, the unwritten agenda, a wink and a nudge given to these contractors to cause maximum hardship and difficulty when they are least likely to be able to cope with the hardship and the difficulty before they get the money. And yet, according to the declarations, United Nations Declaration and the European Convention of Human Rights, these people should be given the money automatically. There should not be any time because they are in urgent need of the money now, here and now. And yet they are caused to wait for days, weeks, months. And in that process, many of them have been forced to commit suicide. And so what is happening now is that Keir Starmer, who was Director of Public Prosecutions in this country at the Crown Prosecution Service, which does the criminal prosecutions of crimes that the police investigate and then bring to the CPS. This is a post of director that Keir Starmer held for 5 years. And it coincided with the first 3 years of the tenure in that office of Dracula Duncan Smith. So when Keir Starmer's term as the DPP, or Director of Public Prosecutions, came to an end, just a month before he left that post, he issued practice direction, let's say, for the Crown Prosecution Service. And he added a number of additional offenses without there being any legislation, without there being any parliamentary act of parliament. He created the harshest possible obstacles against the poorest people. And he criminalized people being in poverty. So this is the man who is supposed to be the leader of the opposition. What can you expect? He's not going to support the rights of the victims of the suicide or their bereaved families or their children or other people who are missing them and who are closest to them. So this is an emptiness that prevails in this country. And the Daily Mirror is not helping end this emptiness. Although it is doing the kind of peace, but it is not helping end the emptiness. Now, yesterday, we had this piece about the murder of an Irish artist called Adrian Murphy. Now, Adrian Murphy from Irish Republic, not the Northern Ireland part of the UK, but the Irish Republic, which is an independent country and member of the European Union. This man, Murphy, was murdered by Joel Osei, who is an African origin man who has been sentenced to 32 years for the murder, which is called Devil's Breath murder. Now, Devil's Breath is a kind of drug that they used. And his accomplice, who has been also convicted of murder, is described in this piece as a teenage girlfriend, Diana Christia, 19. Now, Osei and this Diana Christia met their victim through a dating application called Grindr. And the details are not necessary to be repeated, but the point we make about this teenage girlfriend is the child safeguarding point. First of all, whether she was groomed by the criminal, Osei, or she was protected under these child safeguarding children by the local council, whatever the local council she came under. Because if she was a teenager, surely her activities should have been under kind of observation by the local council. Local councils in England have got a duty to safeguard children, and that includes all stages of safeguarding children, which you don't have to give the full list of, but that is what we said yesterday, and we have been posting about that question, so we shall continue to update on that one. And we say that because in the northern English counties or boroughs, like areas across north of England, some of the towns will remind people of the areas that we are referring to. Barnsley, Keighley, Blackburn, Blackpool, Dewsbury. These are the places that have been included in the long investigation into the grooming of mainly white girls by mainly Pakistan origin, England born gangs of criminals who exploited these mainly white girls, groomed them, made many of them have sex against their will. And when the reports were published in the last, let's say, few years, The roles played by the local councils in the areas of the crimes, and the questions included this question about safeguarding children. What were the councils doing? These are children. So we said the same thing about this girl, because she is not sentenced yet, but she is due to be sentenced later, on a later date. But in our view, compared to the white girls that were groomed, massively groomed by the England-born gangs of Pakistani origin men. Now, the Pakistani origin men have correctly been condemned for everything they did against these girls. And the role of the councils, the role of the local politicians, the role of the MPs have been correctly condemned, but not enough in our view. Because these girls have been completely destroyed. These children have been destroyed, their lives have been destroyed. So every one life destroyed in that way is one too many. Every child, and in this context, every girl deserves the maximum protection and safeguarding. So what happened to this girl? Who made her his girlfriend? And who made her a criminal and a murderess? And these are the questions that we are asking about the role of the council wherever she came from, whatever area she lived in. And we shall update in due course and accordingly. So what we're doing is looking at the newspapers as part A of the world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street of today, Friday, the 29th of January 2021. Now, the contents of the Daily Star today, London tabloid Daily Star. This is a very common name, title given to an English language paper. Many countries have got a Daily Star. In South Africa, in Bangladesh, and in other countries. Many countries have got the paper called Daily Star. And this Daily Star, we shall be going back to Hitchen with this one. Remember, we said Hitchen in connection with Peter Lilly, the bastard, one of the three bastards, and the bastard who actually created or contributed to the agenda and the narrative and the mechanics of causing deaths by hunger to the poorest people who are supposed to be given welfare benefits. Now, this Daily Star is so stupid that it needs to be displayed to be believed. It is so infantile and idiotic. So this headline today, now, this is not serious. This headline is not serious and this story is not serious. It says, experts say that chimpanzees can speak, but just can't be bothered. I mean, we are not using the actual word they have used here, which is obscene. A bit like the clowns in the cabinet. Now, there is no comparison. There is no comparison whatsoever between these innocent animals or creatures and the corrupt, criminally active cabinet fronted by Boris Johnson. And, we shall not go into any further detail. And they've got on page 2 pictures of Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer. Again, they're using an obscene word. and we are not going to repeat that. And they're not serious because they're saying that there is a website which shows if a particular MP is an idiot or a crook and a creep, CREEP, creep. I mean, there is an equivalent word in the subcontinent shared by the Hindi and the Urdu language, khatarnak. So this is the one meaning of khatarnak, that is. And there is a program on a Pakistan television channel called Khabarnak, which is a take on the khatarnak. Now, because we don't follow and we don't have access to the actual contents that are done in Urdu, we shall be looking to find if there is a version in English of what they actually broadcast. And today we have included on our list of Twitter accounts that we follow for the contextual examination of what is going on in the subcontinent. We have added the Twitter account of a person who is described as a presenter of the Khabarnak, named Khabarnak sounding Khatarnak outlet on a Pakistani television channel. By looking at the videos which contain Urdu, we assume Urdu, it could be another Pakistani language, but we assume it's Urdu. By looking at the body languages and the facial kind of expressions and the reactions, we assume that they're not the ones that we have actually watched. They're not talking about the empire, the British Raj, or the events of 1947 and the events since then. So we shall be checking on the contents. What we are saying here is that none of the so-called documentary outlets in the subcontinent, and we include the 3 countries, outlets that we have technical access to, meets the requirements of these countries. By these countries, we mean the people's needs. For example, in India, the number of people going hungry and in poverty, lack of housing and all the other rights, uniquely the largest number in any country in the world, obviously, because India has got more than 1 billion people. So that is the reason. But the other reason is the failure of the Congress party. The Congress party, fronted by the Kashmiri-born Jawaharlal Nehru and his daughter, failed, despite the slogan that she started, Indira Priyadarshini Gandhi. Priyadarshini is a misleading name because, like Priti Patel here, the current interior minister in Britain, Priti is pretty. Priti is in English pretty, and Priyadarshini is the lovely looking, affectionate looking, good looking, whatever, Indira Nehru. She popularized the slogan, Garibi Hatao. But in the India today, hundreds of millions of people are suffering from abject poverty and denial of human rights. And that is only the beginning of the bleakness in which hundreds of millions of people across India exist, just about. And the Brahminists and the BJP and the Modis They have made things worse for the Muslims, who are not a small number, hundreds of millions Muslims in India. And the Congress party is completely silent. Whatever the Nehru dynasty members spew, that is utter in stupidity, it's completely useless. It's no match for the cause that needs to be fought for these hundreds of millions of people. The Dalits, the people denied basic human rights by the Brahmins and the Brahminists, and the Muslims and the other people of other religions and minority that are being denied, deprived human rights, contrary to the Universal Declaration that the United Nations was founded on. And when Antonio Guterres, I call him Antonio Gutless, the current Secretary General of the United Nations, he went to India and preened and grinned. Grin is a smile with stupidity. So he was grinning when he met Narendra Modi. Modi has been violating the United Nations charters, right, left, and center. And Guterres, the gutless, was congratulating Modi. And as we said, we have been compiling a list of social media accounts. Many of the ones that we have already included are film actors from both Telugu, Tamil, and the Mumbai ones. We are doing that factually to see what they actually are interested in and what they do. And our lookout has been for reason why the scripts are so stupid and so dark, so backward. And what do these people do? The viewing figures are in the millions, many of them. What are they kind of watching? What are they being entertained by? Because we have already called the Indian films, the blockbusters, many of them blockbusters, factory produced films. The scripts are about 60 to 70% identical. The mannerism, the Superman fights, and even the use of the word tension, no matter whether they're dubbed from one language or the other, there is a common factor, there is a common word, tension. Why do they use the word tension? What about the stress and depression and all the other things? So it's factory produced, cheaply produced in the sense of not being rigorous. And there is a placement of the Apple computer, the MacBook Pro or the MacBook, whatever the version. It's a MacBook that is on display most of the times. This is grotesque, irresponsible, antisocial. And they don't mention the contents of the fight against the British imperialists. Sometimes they've got a picture on the wall of M.K. Gandhi. And less frequently, they've got a picture of Subhash Bose. Now, Gandhi and Subhash Bose didn't agree at all. And there is no discussion. Of course, the factory production also includes I love you. Whatever the dubbing, they have this I love you. This is odd. I love you is not a Telugu language word, or the Kannada or Malayalam language, whatever the actual local dialect or linguistic kind of contents or vocabulary is. I love you is not part of the local languages. And yet they have got this I love you everywhere. Even Sarika Singh, who sings, they've got an item which has got in the otherwise Indian language song, I love you is there. So we are looking at the events of the last 74 calendar years from August 1947 to now. And this is part of the contents of the diagnosis that we are doing. Now, shoring up Boris Johnson's political image is, of course, part of the agenda and the narrative for the dirty digger Rupert Murdoch and his scum. That is son, but we call it scum because of its filthy, dishonest, racist kind of role and behavior. And they're completely accusing Nicola Sturgeon, who is the First Minister of Scotland and a member of the SNP. And she definitely wants Scotland to become a member of the European Union. So they're saying that she sides with the EU. Now, this is absolutely not new, most certainly not news, because she is against Brexit and she is very much for the EU membership. And as we said, we may not agree with her on her detailed political kind of strategy or agenda, but we agree on the fact that the EU is much preferable to the UK membership by the SNP. And as we said, there are so many constitutional law framework benefits. Now, back to the front page of the scum and why we call it the shoring up of the image of Boris Johnson. Because they're diverting attention from the failure by Johnson to protect the lives of 100,000 plus people in the UK that have died under the failed government, conservative government. So they're diverting on the vaccine, and there is no guarantee, and there is no evidence yet, and there won't be evidence for a very long time yet as to the efficacy, that is to the effectiveness of this vaccine, whether it can actually prevent people from getting infected again, and so on. And they're admitting it, not this particular item, but they're admitting. So why they keep talking about the vaccine numbers, the vaccine shortage, the vaccine kind of statistics, the row with the vaccine, row with the EU about the vaccine. And they're doing this, they're overstating the importance of the vaccine. And that is to divert attention from the failing side of Boris Johnson as Prime Minister to the what they want to paint as the achieving side of the Prime Minister. And that is the side where Boris Johnson is being shown in the positive, achieving side, like arguing for British vaccine and arguing for the raising of the number of the people being vaccinated, all positive words, positive attributes and qualities. And they're also against the lockdown. Now, this is something to those who don't live in the UK and haven't got much experience of the role of the scum. This edition, this crocodile tears for the disruption to the schools. By schools, they mean the state school, that is to say, schools that are not privately kind of enjoyed by the children of the rich and wealthy. Ordinary people go to schools. That is the school sector that they're talking about. And that is what makes it crocodile tears, that is dishonestly kind of showing their sympathy for the children of those schools that are being kept at home because the schools are closed due to the lockdown. Ordinarily, the performance of these schools are not even covered by the Scum and the Daily Mail and the Daily Express of Beaverbrook. Beaverbrook is the name of the original owner of the Daily Express during Winston Churchill's time, and he was later made a member of the government. But Beaverbrook's name is a disgrace because he was a racist, imperialist, and a liar for the Conservative government. And his Daily Express is a liar as well. So when I said that we shall be going to Hitchin with this one, when this paper was first published, it's a new title, this Daily Star. It was published in the 1980s. And the first editor of the Daily Star was a man called Hitchin. Hitchin, spelled Hitchen. And there is a town where Peter Lilly came from, Hitchin. Hitchin. Hitchin in Hertfordshire. Now, one of the first items that the newly launched then Daily Star ran in the 1980s was against a family of Bangladeshis. And the reason for running that story was that this family was given council home in Hitchin. And the council home needed by the family had to be bigger than one needed by a small family because they had a larger numbers of people in the family. And they attacked the family. That is the 1980s. And so I went to the office. It was in Fleet Street, actual Fleet Street, opposite the office of the Reuters news agency and the Press Association in Fleet Street, along the same side as the Daily Telegraph was based at the time. Not far from the St. Paul's Cathedral, which is on the other side of the road. And I confronted these people and I demanded to know why they were running this hate piece against this family called Abdul. So when I say world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street, I mean that literally. I have been there and I'm the one that has confronted them, not just this one, but others as well. And there was nothing, no substance. But what actually stands out with the role of the Labour Prime Minister later, Tony Blair, is that when Blair won his second general election in 2003, he set out to destroy council housing for people in low income, in poverty, and with numbers of people in need of housing in the family. Tower Hamlets, which is where the Khoodeelaar campaign is originally based in, Tower Hamlets Council was forced, according to the council, but substantially so, was put under pressure to give away thousands of council homes to two gangs of criminals disguising themselves as social landlords. One is called Poplar Harca, Harca, and the other is the THCH, that is Tower Hamlets Community Housing. Now, those thousands of council homes are worth billions of pounds, and Tower Hamlets Council doesn't have billions of pounds to spend to make council homes again. So what it did was to remove thousands of council homes from the reach, access of individuals and families that urgently needed the housing. Now, in London today, there are 32 boroughs, but actually there are 31 boroughs because one borough is very small. The borough is the equivalent of a borough called the City of London, which is very small, but let's say on average, there are anything between 10 to 30,000 people on the housing waiting list, 32 boroughs. And this figure, 10 to 30,000, let's say, has remained constant. The variables being one particular borough has slightly reduced number in 1 year, and another borough has got slightly increased number another year. That kind of variables, let's forget those. And on average, let's say that on average, all the boroughs have had 10 to 30,000 people at any time waiting for council housing or public housing. To students of capitalism and students of capitalist law, I mean, there is a work of reference. It's a beginning work of reference, but not the exclusive one, and it has been updated since the 1970s. There is a man from a Irish state, I mean, the university, probably Dublin University, Tom Haddon. Tom Haddon wrote a book. One of the books is an emeritus professor of law, academic lawyer. He wrote Company Law and Capitalism, but that's only a starter. There are other essays and examinations of the role played by company law in reinforcing capitalism and discrimination and division and denial and all the perpetuation of lack of access to things like housing, jobs and health, and the NHS and all the rest of it. The housing as a right, as a human right, is not a market commodity. And yet the housing has been turned into a marketable commodity. And once you make this marketable commodity, only those who have the highest income can afford it. So the phrase affordable housing is complete misnomer, false, unfounded, untruthful. In another edition, in other editions, we shall be exposing the stupid role being played by Sadiq Khan, who is the son of a bus driver with Pakistani background. The bus driver is a fact, he peddles. It's not me doing it, but he does it. And he's a stooge of big property companies and operators. So we're talking about his completely bogus use of the phrase affordable housing. There is no such thing as affordable housing if it is in the market. Affordable housing and social housing, or affordable housing versus social housing, and affordable housing versus council housing, affordable housing versus public sector housing, are two very different things. Affordable housing is a commodity in the capital, in the market. And the other three are versions of the ones based on the principle of need. Provision based on the principle of needing the housing as a right, as a human rights. Just like the principle of the UK's National Health Service, the founding principle was to get the health service at the point of need, regardless of the ability to pay for that service. And that payment had to come from the state, from the public sector, which is one of the targets of the capitalists, has been from the beginning. And the Labour Party, as fronted by Keir Starmer now, or as fronted by Tony Blair before, failed or chose not to support the equipping of the NHS in the way that it needed, or equipping of the housing provision, housing service in the way that people needed. So what we are doing is talking about Fleet Street today, and in the talking we are examining the real issues and the behavior of the parties and others making decision affecting ordinary people in this country. So this is part one of the Khoodeelaar campaign, diagnosing Fleet Street, world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. Part A being done on Friday, the 29th of January 2021. We shall be continuing in due course. This is now coming to an end, this part, because I think we have been going now. This is just before 12:15 hours GMT. So we have been broadcasting roughly since 10. Let's check the time we started. And the time is coming. I'm looking at the banner. And it's 10:30, so 11:30. So just under 2 hours, let's say. So we shall be continuing. And the other point we have to make is that we do transcriptions, edited transcriptions, because usually this will be like 10,000, 11,000 words, this particular broadcast. So we cannot be doing the complete transcript, which will take days to edit. So what we do is highlight the aspects of the transcript that we think would be useful and interesting to visitors of our Twitter account mainly, but Facebook sometimes. And we shall be doing that in due time, by its due course. So what happens is it takes several hours to do the transcript, of course, for understandable reasons. So this is coming to an end about just before 12:15 hours GMT, and we shall be continuing. This is Friday, also the day of the Friday prayers.